Okay, so today we're going to talk about nested loops. And so the idea of nested loops is really just a loop inside another loop. uh, and what does that look like, right? So um, how about this? So let's write a for loop um, that repeats 5 times. So I want you to go ahead and try that out. Maybe pause the video and see if you can write a for loop that repeats 5 times. Okay, so um, the way you write a for loop, right? You start with for in parentheses, and then you have int I, so you initialize this variable to 0. You can set I less than 5, and then you have I plus plus, okay? So, and then you need your parentheses, okay? Now, so this is going to do things 5 times. Now, what if I needed to repeat more inside of this, right? So how can we write another for loop inside of here? So let's say in here, um, let's repeat this. Let's repeat this. Let me see, 6 times. Okay, so go ahead and write another for loop inside here that'll repeat 6 times. Okay, so I'm going to write that, and that's going to be for int I. Okay, so here's a tricky thing, right? We already have I defined, and so you don't want another I. And the other thing that we usually do is we have some sort of other name. It's J, right? And then we have J is less than 6, and then J plus plus, right? So in this loop, we're incrementing J every time we do the for loop instead of I, okay? So how does this really trace out? Let me actually um, change this to, let's say, like 10. So let's um no, sorry. Let me think. Okay, no, I want to change this to 6, and let's change this to 10. See how that pans out. Not exactly sure. But okay. So let me move this over here, down, do a little bit more. Okay. And let me actually move this up a little bit. And let me move this down a little more. Okay. So how does this really trace out? Well, we can put a few variables here. So I'm going to say, or not variables. I'm going to write system.out.println here. And let's just print out I, what I is. Okay. And inside here, we're going to say system.out.println J. Okay. So what do you think? Oh, this is like a rainbow or galaxy thing. I didn't even notice. That's cool. Anyway, so what do you think is going to be printed out? What do you think is going to be printed out? So pause the video and think about this for a little bit. What do you expect I to be printed out, and then what do you think J is? Okay, so let's kind of go through this. So we have I here, then we have our super cool galaxy colored J. Okay, and so let's trace through as we would usually. So we come into our first for loop, and we set I to 0, so we have I is 0. And 0 is less than 6, so we continue to this line, so we print out 0, which is fine, right? And then we come down to the second for loop, and okay, well, now we're initializing J, right? And J is going to be initialized to 0, and then 0 is less than 10, so we continue into this for loop inside here, Now it's going to print out j. So it prints out 0, which is there. Okay. Now we reached the end of the inner for loop. So this inner for loop, or this loop right here, is called the inner for loop, and then this here is the outer for loop. Okay, so we reached the end of the inner loop, so we come back up here and increment j, right? So we now increment j, so now j is 1, and 1 is still less than 10, so we print this out. Okay, so we print out 1. Okay, now we reach the end of the inner for loop again, so we now come back up to here again. Now j is going to be 2. Okay, now 2 is still less than 10. We print that out, so that's going to be 2. Okay, now so we continue to print j, and what is j going to be printed until? It's going to be printed until j is 9, right? So it's going to say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and notice how while we're just doing this, while we're happily executing the inner loop, we're not actually touching the outer loop at all, right? Because inside here is what needs to be run first. Okay, and notice how I just get fixed right there. So it just gets fixed at 0 while j is happily changing, right? Now it gets to 9, and then when j, when we print out 9, here the nested inner loop ends, and now we come back up here, and now we evaluate, right? So we print out all these out. Now j is going to be incremented to 10. Now 10 is not less than 10, so we're going to stop the for loop right there, and then we're going to come out of here. And if we happen to have some sort of a like a system.out.println of like inner loop end, then we will see inner loop end, right? Not under j exactly, but we'll see this first, and then we'll come back up to the beginning of this outer loop, and then I is going to be 1. Okay, and now we're going to print out I in this second line right there, so I is going to be printed out like 1. Okay, so the reason I sort of decided to go with 6 and 10 is this is kind of cool. So how do you suppose, what do you sort of see in this, right? If I said, let me remove that for you, if I could. Okay, let me remove this one for you. Put this up here. Okay, so now, what if let me move this. Maybe I should have just done this in code. Let me move this down here. Move this over. Actually, here, let me just delete that. And then put this over a little bit. And then I go ahead and say I plus. And we're going to put these things together in a string. So I and j is going to be joined together. So if I and j were both 0, then you will see 0, 0 printed out. If I and j were 0 and 1, then 0, 1 will be printed out. Okay, so let's see. So let's see if you can sort of deduce what's happening with this code. Okay, so given this sort of code, what is going to be printed out? What is this similar to? And I'll give you a hint. It sort of looks like time. Something that along the lines of time. Okay, so I hope you paused the video, and we can check that out. We can check out what that looks like. Let me go ahead and actually, because we're going to do some turtle stuff with this, we can try this out. Right, so we can go ahead and type all that in. So we have 4 int I is equal to 0, I is less than it was 6, right? I plus plus 4 int j 0, 0, j is less than 10, and j plus plus. Okay, now we print out I concatenated with the empty string, concatenated with j. Now let's try this out. So look over here to compile. Hope this works. Okay, cool. Yeah, so what does this look like to you? This kind of looks like the seconds we have up till 59, and then we come back up here to 0, right? Well, not exactly, but you can see how it's 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5, 0, 9, and then 10, right? And so this is pretty cool. We kind of just simulated the digits on a clock in terms of seconds. So how many seconds or how many minutes even. We just simulated the sort of like the clock, the digits on the clock. And so that's essentially what happens is you have something that is fixed while the other sort of iterates through the sequence. The other one happily repeats and going on and on and on. And the other one waits until it finishes repeating, and then it goes on to repeat on its own first, just for once, and then the second one keeps repeating and repeating and repeating like that. Okay, so it's kind of like this notion of you repeat on the inner loop repeats faster. Actually, it finishes first, and then it goes back into this for loop, this outer for loop, executes once, and then come back down here. Okay, so this is generally what nested loop is for. And then in our next video, we're going to look at how this could be useful in our turtle drawings.